Welcome to Woah Drama Stories. We indulge of speaking of day-to-day troubles of human beings. Let's not wait any longer and start with the video. A friend advised me to share this here. This happened a few years ago. For 5 years, I, 28 female, dated Kyle, 29 male. We were all in it together. We shared a house, our money, 2 cats, and so on. Beth, 28 female, my best friend, lived 10 minutes away, so we were always together. We were basically the 3 musketeers. I was surfing through Instagram one day when I noticed my boyfriend in the background of a photo posted on our local pub's page. He was supposed to be at work, and I'd never been given any reason not to believe him, so I assumed it was an earlier photograph because we go there a couple of times a month. But when he returned home, he was still dressed in the same aqua green button-up shirt and pants. I felt my heart in knots, and I felt my stomach turning, but I didn't say anything. I went through his phone that night. Oh yeah, I know, but I don't care. We've always exchanged passwords and have never had a problem utilizing one another's phones. When I viewed his messages, I noticed a certain chain with the name Tim. We didn't know a Tim, so I went through them and my heart broke. I've known my best friend since we were babies, and I'm familiar with the way she texts, but I double-checked the number just to make sure, and sure enough, they were chatting behind my back. There were photographs and mentions of sexual activities that had occurred, not just talking. The entire night I sobbed while sending myself every screenshot and any piece of information I could. I understood the next morning that I couldn't just face them. I needed to get ready, so I resolved to save money. I tell him our dishwasher is broken, so I'm repairing it with some of our funds, and we need a plumber or a handyman for this or that. All nonsense, but I needed a reason to withdraw funds from the account to which we both had access. I saved enough money in 2 months to put down a deposit and pay many months in advance for a new apartment that was closer to work and pet-friendly. While he was at work, I was able to gradually shift things there. I told him I was doing some spring cleaning to clear out the clutter. Meanwhile, I messed with their heads. I'd say things about each other that would produce drama, such as telling Kyle that Beth mentioned an attractive guy that she used to work with, or telling Beth that Kyle had started discussing marriage and children with me. She herself is infertile. I put my strategy into action the day before I left. I knew where my best friend ate lunch most days of the week, so I just stood there and waited. When she came in, I pretended I didn't want to choke her for betraying my trust and shattering my heart. We sat down and talked, and I casually mentioned having sex with Kyle. She told him in their text that she didn't want him to sleep with me since she'd grown pretty possessive of my boyfriend. I made remarks about how sore I was since we did it rough, which is how I prefer it. I explicitly stated how good he was at oral. You name it, and I mentioned it. It was incredible to watch her face turn redder and redder. I'd seen her respond like that before, but I had no idea why. She would annoyingly always insist on playing video games all night, watching late-night movies with us, or just sleeping over on our couch instead of going home and then getting upset when I had to say no. I assumed she was just lonely or clingy and wanted to be around me. But I had no idea she didn't want to leave because she wanted to make sure we weren't having sex. What? Later that day, I return home and act that everything is fine. But I sit on the couch with him and cuddle up to him as he watches television. I straddle him after about 20 minutes and ask him how his day went and blah blah blah. Then I mentioned meeting Beth at lunch, and you'll never guess who she was with. I told him about Beth and Chris, her real-life ex-coworker, who has been out with us several times. And how lovely it is that they're dating now. When I say he froze, I mean he didn't even breathe. He just sort of murmured, I didn't realize she was dating someone. So I told him about how I saw them kissing, and Beth told me about their fantastic sex life when Chris left to go back to work. And of course I had to mention that Chris was the first guy to give her a genuine orgasm when she had previously had to fake it with guys. I'd never seen him look so defeated. That night, I suggested we have a phone-free night, which we do frequently so we could be alone. I could tell he was hesitant, but he turned off his phone and placed it in the basket we use for it. We cuddled on the couch and watched a movie, and he remained stiff as a board for most of it, before relaxing enough to fall asleep on the couch. Once he was gone, I took his work phone and sent an email to everyone on his contact list about how I might be in a terrible mood for the next few weeks because my mistress gave me the clap. Then I changed the passcode on it and turned it off. I knew he wouldn't turn it on until he arrived at his workplace, which was about 40 minutes away. I quickly packed my bags, vital papers, and the cats, and went as soon as he was out the door. I also unscrewed most light bulbs, removed the batteries from the remote, removed the router plug-in so he wouldn't have Wi-Fi, and turned the AC up to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. When I went to my new apartment, I texted her and asked how her pussy tasted before blocking them both. Then I uploaded screenshots on Facebook to show everyone, including their families, I tagged them, what disgusting individuals they were. The last I heard, they did not work out. He lost the house because he could not keep up with the payments with his salary, and none of his family would help him because they knew what he had done, and they reached out to me as well, apologizing to me. So did Beth's family. I honestly do not care if this makes me a bad person. All this planning and plotting and pitting them against each other. I had known her my whole life, and him enough to discuss marriage. I just could not let two people see me at my vulnerable, lie to me, and use it against me. But I don't think that's enough. All these people I used to love, but they were the ones to kick me down the most. So why does the thought of them hurting make me feel so sick and sad? Story 2. It all started with me exploring the hair care subreddit, which led me down a rabbit hole of researching 4A curl care. My wife's hair was often frizzy, so I lurked there to obtain ideas for a hair care gift package. I happened to notice she'd shared a selfie with the caption, "The lion's mane behaved itself today." She sat across from me in the lounge, her gaze locked on her phone. I went to the post and gave it an award. Her express brightened up a few seconds later. "Is everything all right?" I queried. "Just some funny group chat text." I then stalked her profile on a daily basis. When the two of us were in the lounge, I'd award her posts and watch her excitedly kick her feet around. This intimate knowledge assisted me in nailing her birthday gift, a blanket crocheted from old t-shirts that no longer fit, and offered me ideas for our anniversary, dinner at a place she'd inquired about in our city's local sub. It felt as though I'd activated the cheat codes in our marriage. But after I lost my work, her posts changed. She started reading the marriage/relationship advice subs. And after 3 weeks of my tanking numerous interviews, she asked for guidance on dead bedrooms, as if I needed a reminder that I couldn't perform. I could feel my stomach churning as I read this, felt so ashamed that I was in this situation, that I had failed at being a husband, that I hadn't figured out how to go back to how we were, that I hadn't been able to provide my wife with the stability and comfort and intimacy. I felt like such a failure. I couldn't believe what I was reading. I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe my wife would ever, although anonymously, throw me in front of the bus to strangers. They all judged and gave her pieces of advice on how she should abandon me and leave me because she deserves better. And I know she does, but she has no idea how much I've struggled with my job and how hard it has been to look for a new opportunity. And those strangers had no right to nitpick my life. I was so angry, so confused, so hurt, and so humiliated. Our marriage was crumbling before my eyes, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. It was difficult not to reveal anything. I knew she shared intimate details about our relationship with strangers on the internet, but if I told her, she'd just create a new account, and I'd lose my window into her mind. Her first post had received considerable traction, which meant that many users had requested an update, so she posted about how the situation had deteriorated. She wrote about how I was suddenly snapping at everything and even lashing out. The tension grew even stronger. Soon after, the ultimate gut punch arrived in the form of a confession post titled, "I am frightened of my husband." What would have occurred if a Reddit user went radio silent after that bombshell? It would have resulted in a scandal. An investigation is underway. Talk about a rude awakening. I soothed the situation by preparing a couple of romantic meals for her and apologized profusely for venting my feelings to her. I even purchased the hair care package. This prompted her to post some encouraging updates. She commented that, while we still had a long way to go, things were looking good, that we'd be fine. But the truth is that things are not fine, and they'll never be the same again now that I know what she truly thinks of me. So I looked for subs in which she was still active, subs like this one. Then I got down to create my very first blog article. As I typed this, she is sitting across from me. There's a knife under my armchair, and I've already decided how I'm going to dispose of the body. Now all that remains is for her to read my confession and know what is about to happen. So Gemma, sweetie, if you're reading this, it's time for you to look up now. Story 3. Despite my husband's constant claims that those who believe in ghosts lack intellectual depth, he persists in accompanying me on a short adventure. But this didn't bother me. To be honest, I was hoping Jack would invite himself. Look, I'm not blaming you for what happened, and I don't want to make you feel bad about it. His voice was soothing, and I sighed deeply as his words sank into my brain. He continued as the two of us walked along the beach, ankle deep in the ocean. It's simply that, as I've said before, I need 20 minutes to decompress after work. When I go home, I want to rest, not have you jump on me about everything. I lost count of how many times he told me this during the last year, and every time he told me, I responded the same way. I didn't say anything. I just kept walking ahead of him, my gaze set on the horizon. He grabbed my arm, but I ignored him. After a few moments of silence, he returned his gaze to me. When he noticed my resolution not to discuss it further, his demeanor softened somewhat. "You are correct, darling." Jack stayed to my right and moved further out. White waves slammed on black rocks nearby, bringing up hissing columns of froth. Only a sliver of sunshine poked over the horizon, and now and again I caught a glimpse of a pale form cutting through the waves towards us. I felt a shudder run down my spine every time it vanished beneath the waves. Plus, Jack added, angry, I was still upset over the texts I discovered on your phone. "Do you realize how much they hurt me?" he said angrily. The reminder only made matters worse, but I tried to not let my anger show. "But Ryan has been my best buddy since we were children," I began to protest, but in reaction to my partner's ominous forehead wrinkle, I instead murmured, "I'm sorry." He took a deep breath. As we walked up the coast quietly, the sun set behind the horizon, leaving only moonlight to guide us. Jack gathered up stones and skimmed them across the surface, one of which sailed directly over the shape, which was now about 30 yards away. It dived beneath the surface without making a sound. We continued to walk for a while in silence, each of us deep in thought. When I glanced over at Jack, I noticed that he was staring at his phone again. "You know my parents think you're nuts with this spirit hunting crap," he said, "but I let them know how much you appreciate it." "No, not quite. This is an elderly lady who was..." He pretended to snore. "Could you please just give me the lift pitch version? You know how much it frustrates me when you go off on meaningless tangents." An old woman was being abused by her family. One of them killed her and put her body into the sea. Then her spirit came back and drowned all her relatives. I responded hurriedly. She's now said to be looking for more abusers to drag to the watery grave. There was a long pause as I paused for dramatic effect. He looked at me for a moment and then let out a huge yawn. He grinned. "It's adorable how you believe this nonsense, and it's not like I will be affected by this old woman. You are funny, Jenny." I let out a forced smile. I wanted to respond to this sarcastic statement, but I was too preoccupied with the silvery, rotten fingers reaching out of the water and grabbing at my dear husband's flesh and skin. As I watched, the hand severed his spine and pulled him under. I'll never forget the last thing he spoke to me as his head slipped under the water and his eyes rolled back into his head. It was a grasp for life, a murmur of help. Story 4. I've been up all night thinking about this, so I hope it makes sense. My son and his wife welcomed a baby boy 2 weeks ago. Both are 23. My son called me and said, would I like to spend a week with them? I said as long as it was okay with his wife, I would love to. Well, I got there. He collected me from the airport. We talked at lunch, then went to his place. When I got there, my daughter-in-law, Megan, was hurrying around trying to tidy up. She told me she only found out that morning that I was coming. I looked at my son and he went red, then said it was time to meet my long-lost grandchild. As I was walking and I noticed the house was not clean, and then Megan hadn't looked like she showered in days. It didn't sit right with me, but I've had 12 children, so I know things get messy fast, especially when you're tired. After meeting the baby, my son said I'll leave you girls to talk. I'm just going to pop out for an hour to the gym. So I asked Megan how she was getting on with motherhood. She told me that it was beautiful, but she was exhausted with feeds every 2 hours. It didn't sit right with me the way she said every 2 hours. So I asked her if she would like to nap or do whatever while I look after the baby. In my 61 years of living on this earth, I've never seen an adult fall asleep faster. I looked after the baby for 4 hours and made lunch till Megan woke up and took a shower. After a day of watching my son, who's on paternity, do nothing but look at me and Megan when the baby cried, no help with the household work or cooking, which he should be doing all by himself because she just had a C-section. I usually don't involve myself in my kid's relationship, but he got on my nerves, and no, he wasn't raised like that. So I told Megan she was being a doormat, that she smelled like she had an infection, that she needed to be on bed rest, and that my son should do 100% of the cooking and cleaning rather than act like a single teenager. They had a fight, and my son told me I was a Karen and a bitch for calling his home dirty and his wife smelly. Megan and I didn't fall out. She's asked me to watch the baby, which me and my daughters have paid for. But my son, who isn't here, said I ruined his marriage, and that it's all my fault that his wife isn't talking to him. Am I the bad guy in this situation? Update. I decided to apologize to my son because I think I may have overstepped my bounds. My daughter-in-law is still mad at my son because she thought I was right about the whole thing. I had a talk with my son and calmly told him that he needs to step up and be a good husband and father to his family. He listened to me without arguing, and he apologized too for his behavior. I think they're going to be okay. It's just the beginning of their family, and things tend to get out of hand sometimes.